In the autumn of 1462, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the man who had conquered Constantinople 9 years earlier, the most feared military commander in the known world, rode north into Wallachia at the head of an army of 90,000 men. He was going to remove a problem. The problem was the ruler of a small principality between the Danube River and the Carpathian Mountains, a man who had been raiding Ottoman territory, killing Ottoman soldiers, and publicly humiliating the empire. The Sultan had dispatched emissaries earlier that year to bring the troublesome ruler to heel. The emissaries had not returned. They had been impaled. What Mehmed found as his army advanced through Wallachia has been recorded by multiple Ottoman chroniclers and confirmed by independent Venetian and German sources. On the approach to the Wallachian capital of Targovist, the Ottoman army passed through a forest. The forest was made of stakes, 20,000 stakes by the most conservative estimate, some of them reaching 30 feet into the air, each one bearing an impaled human body. The bodies were Ottoman soldiers, prisoners, and anyone else who had been captured in recent campaigns. They had been arranged in deliberate patterns, organized by rank, the bodies of senior officers on taller stakes at the center. The smell alone, by the accounts of chroniclers, was enough to halt the advance. Mehmed, according to his own court historian, turned his horse around. He said the man who had created this deserved to rule a larger kingdom. Then the Ottoman army withdrew. The man who had built the Forest of the Dead was Vlad the Third, Prince of Wallachia, known to his own people, while he lived, as Vlad Dracula, known to history as Vlad the Impaler. The story of the real Vlad begins not with horror but with politics, and specifically with the particular brutality of 15th century Balkan politics, which was itself a kind of horror. Vlad was born around 1428, the second son of Vlad II, ruler of Wallachia. His father was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded by the Holy Roman Emperor to defend Christian Europe against the Ottoman advance. The Wallachian word for dragon was Drac. Vlad II was therefore known as Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Dragon. His son, Vlad the Third, became Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon. Wallachia in the 15th century was caught between two overwhelming forces: the Ottoman Empire pressing from the south and east, expanding relentlessly into the Balkans, and the Kingdom of Hungary pressing from the north and west. The rulers of Wallachia survived by maneuvering between these powers, paying tribute to one while accepting protection from the other, switching allegiances as circumstances demanded, and frequently being overthrown and replaced by rivals backed by whichever great power was currently dissatisfied. In 1442, when Vlad was around 14 years old, his father sent him and his younger brother Radu to the Ottoman court as hostages, a standard diplomatic practice of the era designed to guarantee Wallachia's loyalty. It was not unusual. It was not humane. Young men sent as hostages to foreign courts lived under the permanent threat that if their fathers betrayed the agreement, they would be killed. Vlad spent several years in the Ottoman court. The accounts of what his life there was like vary. Some suggest he received a genuine education in military strategy, philosophy, and horsemanship alongside Ottoman princes. Others suggest the conditions of his captivity were considerably harsher, that he was punished physically to maintain his compliance, that the experience was formative in ways that left permanent marks. His younger brother Radu adapted. Radu converted to Islam, entered the service of the Ottoman court, and became a companion and reportedly a favorite of the future Sultan Mehmed II. He would later fight against Vlad on behalf of the Ottomans. In 1447, Vlad II was assassinated. He was killed by Wallachian nobles who had switched allegiance to Hungary, his body thrown into a swamp. His eldest son, Vlad's brother Mircea, was buried alive. Vlad was 17 years old when he learned his father had been murdered and his brother buried alive by the Boyars, the noble class of Wallachia. What followed over the next 2 decades was a series of power struggles for the Wallachian throne that Vlad won, lost, and won again with the support of shifting powers. He held the throne briefly in 1448 with Ottoman support. He was driven out. He spent years in exile in various courts, including at Hunyadi of Hungary, who had been involved in his father's death. He returned to power in 1456 and ruled Wallachia until 1462. It was in this second reign that the documented atrocities occurred, and the documentation is unusually extensive. The impalement of enemies was not Vlad's invention. It was an established method of execution in the region, used by the Ottomans and others. What was distinctive about Vlad was the scale, the deliberateness, and the precise cruelty of how it was applied. The stake, in the method Vlad favored, was inserted from below and arranged so that the point emerged from the chest or shoulder rather than from a vital organ immediately, prolonging death. The victim could survive for hours, sometimes days, in documented cases. Vlad reportedly insisted on specific angles and positions and punished executioners whose victims died too quickly. The German pamphlets published in the 1460s and 1470s, some of the earliest examples of printing press sensationalism, described in detail the various methods he employed and the variety of people subjected to them. These pamphlets, published primarily in Nuremberg and other German cities, were enormously popular, running through multiple editions, and constituted some of the first mass-produced horror content in European history. They were also, historians have established, substantially based on real documented events, though embellished in detail. What the sources agree on is that Vlad used impalement systematically, not randomly, and with specific political logic behind each application. When he returned to power in Wallachia in 1456, Vlad faced a principality riddled with corruption, weakened by internal feuding between noble families, and economically damaged by decades of instability. The Boyar class, the hereditary nobles who controlled vast estates and owed loyalty that was perpetually negotiable, had murdered his father and brother and contributed to the instability that had repeatedly toppled Wallachian rulers. His response to the Boyar problem has been described by some historians as essentially a revolution, brutal, murderous, and effective. In the most famous single incident of his reign, Vlad invited the Boyar families of Wallachia to an Easter feast. The accounts vary in detail, but agree on the basic event. After the feast, he had the senior nobles, many of them elderly, arrested. He forced the younger and stronger ones to march to a ruined fortress at Poenari, where over a period of months they were used as forced labor to rebuild it. Those who collapsed and died were impaled on the spot. The elderly ones who could not work were impaled immediately. Poenari Castle, rebuilt on a clifftop above a river gorge on the labor of his enemies, became one of his main residences. By the time the Boyar Purge was complete, the hereditary noble class that had dominated Wallachian politics for generations had been effectively destroyed. Vlad replaced them with men who owed their positions directly to him, many of them from the merchant and peasant class, people who had no independent power base, and whose survival depended entirely on their loyalty to the prince. The merchant communities were also subject to his particular attention. He is documented to have impaled Saxon merchants from Transylvania who attempted to bypass Wallachian trade regulations, placing their bodies outside the gates of their own trading posts as warnings to others. The Saxon German-speaking communities of Transylvania were major producers of the anti-Vlad pamphlets, and historians have noted that their hostile accounts need to be read in the context of their own commercial conflict with him. There is a category of stories about Vlad that circulated even in his own lifetime involving the testing of his subjects' honesty. A famous one describes a golden cup placed at a public fountain in the capital, available for anyone to drink from, on the condition that it was never removed. The cup, according to the account, was never stolen during his reign because the population understood the consequences with certainty. The historical truth of this specific story cannot be verified, but it reflects the nature of the environment he created, one in which the certainty of catastrophic punishment produced a particular kind of public order. The Ottoman Campaign of 1462 was triggered by Vlad's refusal to pay tribute and his subsequent raids into Ottoman Bulgaria, in which he reportedly killed tens of thousands of Ottoman subjects and soldiers. His own letter to Hunyadi of Hungary, documenting these raids, lists casualty figures with the precision of an accountant. 23,884 men, he wrote, not counting those burned in homes or whose heads were cut by our soldiers. The night attack he launched against Mehmed's personal camp during the Ottoman Campaign of 1462, in which his forces dressed as Ottoman soldiers and penetrated the camp, hoping to reach and kill the Sultan personally, nearly succeeded. Mehmed escaped only because Vlad's forces struck the tent of his Grand Vizier by mistake in the darkness. The attack, conducted by a force massively outnumbered against the largest Ottoman army of the era, demonstrated a military recklessness that was also, by any measure, extraordinary courage. After the Ottoman withdrawal, Vlad was betrayed by his own ally, the King of Hungary, who had him imprisoned, ostensibly for having forged letters suggesting Vlad was negotiating with the Ottomans. He spent most of the next 12 years as a prisoner in Hungary, though his imprisonment appears to have been relatively comfortable, and he spent part of the period in Buda under loose house arrest, where he reportedly converted to Catholicism and married a Hungarian noblewoman. He returned to Wallachia in 1476 for a third and final reign that lasted only months. In late 1476 or early 1477, he was killed in battle or assassinated, the exact circumstances disputed. His head was sent to Constantinople, where Mehmed had it displayed on a spike as confirmation of his death. His body was buried, by most accounts, at a monastery near the Danube. The grave has never been definitively located. The transformation of Vlad into Dracula, the vampire, occurred over 4 centuries, culminating in Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, which drew on Vlad's name, his association with Transylvania and the Carpathians, and fragments of his reputation that had passed through European folk tradition. Stoker's Dracula is not Vlad. The character shares a name, a geography, and a vague historical resonance. But the vampire mythology grafted onto Vlad's historical figure came not from anything Vlad actually did, but from Eastern European folk beliefs about the undead that long predated him and had no specific connection to him. What is stranger than the fictional version is the documented one. A ruler of a small principality, orphaned by political murder at 17, hostage to a foreign empire for years of his adolescence, who returned to power and used systematic, calculated, publicly visible violence to destroy the class that had murdered his family, defend his territory against the largest empire in the world, and create a form of stability in a principality that had known almost nothing but instability for decades. The men he had impaled outside Targovist were real. The Ottoman army that turned back was real. The documents listing his raids are real. The German pamphlets that made his name a synonym for cruelty across Europe were printed on real presses and bought by real readers who could not get enough of them. The grave where he was buried is somewhere in the ground, unmarked and unfound. The vampire is a story. The man was considerably more difficult to explain.